Okay, good morning, friends. Please inform me, am I audible and visible? Okay, so we will continue where we left. If you have any doubt, because we had finished a very difficult topic in the last class, that was the cycle of erosion concept. तो उसमें किसी को कोई doubt है तो you can ask me now. So we had talked about the division cycle of erosion. I'll give you 2 minutes. किसी को कुछ पूछना है तो पूछ सकते हो. Okay, so no one has anything to ask. Should I continue with the topic? We have to talk about the critical appraisal or the critical evaluation of division cycle of erosion. Okay, so if you talk about the division cycle of erosion, first we'll talk about the positives of the division cycle of erosion. So as I have told you that Davis, once he gave his cycle of erosion, it was a very instant popular. And if you talk about, it was something which was instantly popular, where in the Anglo-American School of Geomorphology. And there were several reasons for this instant popularity. Some of these reasons I have talked about it, they are written here. So division model is highly simple and can be easily applied in field investigation. So it is quite simple. Although जब हम ये simple बात कर रहे हैं तो many of you would disagree. In fact, few of you have also messaged me in the class that it was too much difficult. So what to do? And I have suggested to each one of you that, in fact, in the beginning of the classes itself, I had told you that there will be junctures where at those points you will not understand. So the best thing to do is what? The best thing to do is that you try to memorize later as we move on, later as you have memorized it many times, what will happen? The things will become more clear to you. So that is the thing. But from the technical point of view, how the concepts in geomorphology has developed, geology has developed, division model, if you talk about, it was quite simple. It was simply saying that angle of slope is directly related to its age. That was the simple thing it was saying. So it was simple that if you talk about the angle of slope was directly related to the age of the landform. It was directly related to the age of the landform. So if we see, for example, today Himalayas, they are characterized by very steep slopes. And on the basis of that, we can come to conclusion that Himalayas represent a huge stage of development. So it can be easily applied in field investigations. Okay. He presented his model in a very lucid but compelling style, which was simple and expressive. He expressed many things. Same uh, extension of the first point. Division model came as a general theory of landform development after a long gap. Remember, it was 1785 when Hutton had given his cyclic nature of Earth's history concept. The cyclic nature of Earth history concept, we called it as the principle of uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism. Okay. So it had come after a very long period, almost more than a century. So there was a need for such kind of general theory in the geomorphology discipline, and thus it was very much readily accepted at that point. Division model, what it did, it synthesized, it presented a synthesis of the existing geological thoughts of that time. He incorporated, for example, he incorporated the concepts of base level and genetic classification of river valleys, which was given by the Powell, and concept of graded streams and profile of equilibrium of G.K. Gilbert. Another was principle of uniformitarianism. Another, if you talk about, was the principle of evolution of landforms, as was given by Darwin in marine geomorphology. So all of these were incorporated in a single model by Davis. Thus, अगर मैं सबको ही इंक्लूड कर लूं तो क्रिटिसाइज करने के लिए कोई बचेगा ही नहीं. And thus you can understand that if you talk about, it became a kind of instant hit. Then his model is capable of both historical interpretations of landforms as well as future prediction of landform development. So Himalayas, we can predict future how it will develop. So now if it is in youth stage, it will ultimately pass through mature and ultimately to old. Aravali, which is nearing the old, which is almost in the old stage of development, we can post-dict that in the past it would have been in the youth stage, tall, very tall mountains. Then it would have passed through mature stage, and now finally it has reached to the old stage. So it is capable of both historical interpretation of landforms as well as future prediction of the landforms. So again, because of all these aspects, Davis model, if you talk about, it was very, very popular in the Anglo-American geomorphology school. However, as we said, the popularity of the cyclic concept was limited to the Anglo-American geomorphology. Even this academic intoxication soon vanished, and after 1930s, his model faced severe criticism. In fact, it had been criticized since its inception itself. Okay. And thus, now let us move on to the criticism of division cycle. So, criticism of division cycle can be organized along two headings. There are two types of criticism. There is first category of criticism, and in first category of criticism, we can call it as extension of the model. Extension means people who disagreed with the details, but they have no idea with the approach. And remember, the approach was time-space substitution approach. So where geomorphologists largely agreed to the cyclic concept, but what was the disagreement? They disagreed with the details of the cycle of erosion. So that is one type of criticism. Second type of criticism was Simply it is, rather than extension, it was the rejection. So it is about the wholesale rejection of the cyclic concept itself. They believe that the cyclic model is not feasible because of several reasons. So we will see this is essentially the non-cyclic school. Okay. So these are two category of criticisms leveled against the Daviesian model. Case 1 पर आते हैं, and case 1 is, as we said, where there is extension of the model, where there is more problem with the details of cycle of erosion. So first, if you talk about Davis overemphasized the role of stage. We have already seen that he has overemphasized the role of stage or time to the neglect of the other two, that is structure and process. Thus, what he did injustice to his own statement that landforms are function of structure, process and time. Okay, so this is one. Others would say that there were geomorphologists who believed that Davis should have also included, along with, they had no problem with the aspect of time. In fact, they agreed that time does plays a role. But they were of the view that Davis should have done what? He should have incorporated the role of process and structure in more detail. Then second, Davis has been criticized for not making detailed study of mechanics and the nature of the present day processes. So second one is extension of the first one, that he has neglected the role of process, neither in theory nor in the field. Penck, if you remember, मैंने बताया था, Penck was particularly critical about his shortcoming, this shortcoming of neglect of the process. Okay, we will see that Penck ultimately formulated his own morphological model to replace, if you talk about, the Daviesian model. Then the use of the term normal. He has called his cycle as the normal cycle of erosion. Now, when he is calling his cycle as the normal cycle of erosion, it looks like, or it gives a perception that the temperate humid climate, we have seen that his area of study was basically North America, Appalachian Mountains. So it gives a perception that the temperate humid climates in which he was studying, okay, they are, if you talk about, they are normal, that means they are universal. Okay, they are found everywhere. Okay, that is the most normal thing on earth. In reality, we will be finding that humid climates represent only a small percentage of the total land climates of the world. So again, the use of the word normal to signify that his model is universally applicable has been severely criticized. Like climatic geomorphologists like Peltier actually came later, but still we are using his name, has been overly critical with this aspect and in turn presented his classification of morphogenetic regions. बाद में देखेंगे इसको, that if you talk about, he talks about that different type of climates will have different type of prevailing landforms. Remember हमने ये weathering में किया था. We talked about different type of climates and different type of processes that will be operating. Weathering, with respect to weathering, we saw that the type and intensity of weathering was varying in each of the climates. And thus, if you talk about, they believe that this should have been the case. Similarly, if you talk about, another criticism has been the concept of grade as defined by Davis has proved to be elusive. So Davis, if you talk about, has talked about the concept of grade. हमने देखा था, हमने पूरी थ्योरी जो डेविस की पढ़ी थी वो concept of grade के बेसिस पे पढ़ी थी. बट जिस तरह के ग्रेड एंड इक्विलिब्रियम की वो बात कर रहा है, we don't find any real world example of that. For example, he talks about an entire river becoming graded river. In present circumstances, you don't find any single river in this world which has attained a condition of grade completely. from its source to its mouth. There is no such river in this world. Okay? And to assume further that such a river will continue to be, even if it is suppose formed, it will continue to be in graded condition for so much longer period of time till the cycle of erosion is completed. It is even more oversimplification, which is far away from reality. Principle of uniformitarianism clearly says present is the key to the past. So if we don't find presently such river, we can assume safely that there would have been no such river even in the past. I hope it is clear. Then fifth, the assumption of initial rapid uplift and erosion proceeding only after complete upliftment and under prolonged tectonic stability is unsatisfactory. Presently, we know that this is not the case. We know number of things, like for example, we know that he talks about the short, he talks about the short period rapid upliftment taking place. Okay, and then what he talks about, it then stops. Further, he says that erosion begins only after upliftment is complete. Okay. Again, even if we believe that, suppose this may be correct, but erosion begins only after the upliftment is complete, this is very clearly wrong. It is very far from reality. Okay. Erosion is something which is continuously working. Okay. Erosion is, it continuously operates. It is not something that वेट करेगा कि भैया तुम अपना काम खत्म कर लो तभी हम अपना काम शुरू करेंगे. It doesn't works like that. In fact, this idea is even against the basic principle of geomorphology, that is principle of uniformitarianism. So it is against the principle of uniformitarianism. So principle of uniformitarianism एक बहुत famous statement देता है, and it says that there is no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. No vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. ठीक है, यानी कि ये प्रोसेसेस कब शुरू हुए हमें पता नहीं है, and when they are going to end we still don't know. So that is basically what we have seen, that this is the principle of gradualism. If you remember, हमने इसको बोला था uniformity of rate. ठीक है, so this is something which is, again, we cannot accept this based upon how the science of geomorphology has developed. Similarly, Davis has also been criticized for neglecting the depositional processes as a factor in landform development. He has not talked at all about the depositional processes. This is also reflected in the title Cycle of Erosion. He is more concerned with the process of erosion. But if there is erosion, then what will happen? There will also be simultaneous deposition, and he doesn't talks about that at all. Okay. Then if you talk about, Davis also failed to give adequate significance to biological processes. Okay, this is quite surprising because his work is based on well vegetated middle latitudes. Okay, so the area he was talking about, that is an area where there is presence of forests. ठीक है, हम बाद में देखेंगे. This is the area where you will be finding temperate broadleaf deciduous forests to be present. So these areas are very well vegetated areas. ठीक है, and he doesn't. It is very surprising that he has totally neglected the role of biological processes in his work, which he wanted to do simplification. ठीक है, so that is basically the first category of criticism, where there the if you talk about scientists, they don't have any problem with, if you talk about the concept of evolution. There is problem with the details in which the evolution is taking place. उसी का एक criticism का extension है. ठीक है, ठीक है. एंड अगर मैं इसको बात करूं तो इसको 8th पॉइंट कर लो. Actually from here it should directly come to here. It is agreed today by most geomorphologists that multi-cyclic evolution of landform is more common than monocyclic evolution as envisaged by Davis. Thus complexity is more common than simplicity of landforms. Okay, so this should be actually considered as point 8. I hope I am clear on this. So there are total 8 points. We can talk more criticism in this category because there are so many criticisms in this category which will come later on as we further talk about. Like for example, मैं इसमें डिटेल्स की बात कर सकता हूं. जो जो पॉइंट्स हमने प्रोसेस का क्रिटिसिज्म किया, तो प्रोसेस के क्रिटिसिज्म में फर्दर डिटेल्स हो सकते हैं. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, आई कैन गिव हाउ पेल्टियर has given the periglacial cycle of erosion, how the process related criticism has been done by King. ठीक है, so we can talk about number of other criticisms, how he neglects the role of weathering, mass wasting. ठीक है, he has not given adequate attention to it. We talk about, he talks about slope decline and the decline of river channel gradient, but it doesn't exactly explains how the which processes are leading to slope decline and channel gradient decline. I hope it is clear. Tell me. Then moving on to the wholesale rejection of the concept of cycle of erosion. There is only 1%. Rahul is only commenting. Where are other people? Okay. Turning to the division cycle itself, that means now we are talking about the rejection of the concept of cycle. Most geomorphologists now regard his description of progression of cycle through its various stages as inaccurate if not misleading. There is little evidence to suggest that landforms do evolve to an end result of peneplain. In practice, there are usually no evidences for Davisian assumption that steep slopes are young and gentle slopes are old. In other words, there is fundamental objection to the idea that angle of slopes reveal the age of the landforms. Okay, I'll explain this point. Think about this. Suppose there are two such situations here, and in one situation we find that there is the case of A and case B. So this is a landform ठीक है, where what we find that there is presence of sparse vegetation. ठीक है, देन इफ यू टॉक अबाउट उसी एरिया में एक दूसरा भी लैंडफॉर्म है जहां पर वी फाइंड दैट देयर इज ग्रेट, it is well vegetated landscape. So tell me how the development of these two landforms will take place. फटाफट बताओ, how the development of these landforms will take place. Can I say the one which has sparse vegetation, will it undergo the process of denudation faster? Is it possible कि इसके साथ कुछ ऐसा हो सकता है? Yes or no? But in this case, can I say the vegetation here will protect it from denudation process? And both were formed at the same time. But due to the operating processes, can I say their evolution has taken a different route? Yes or no? And thus here what we find, B, we find that after suppose some time, this is characterized by gentle slope, while this is still characterized by what? Steep slope. So tell me, दोनों की एज तो सेम ही है. Going by Daviesian logic, can I say डेविस का लॉजिक इसको क्या बोलेगा? Will classify it as old, while same Davis logic will classify this landform as what? Young. Yes or no? Am I correct? So do you get this point that several geomorphologists have pointed out that angle of slope depending totally upon the age is something which is not very accurate. Okay, there are several, if you talk about intervening factors. So we know that if you talk about the angle of slope, if we take this as an outcome, suppose Davis is saying what? That this is outcome essentially of the age of landform. This is the Daviesian model. But can I say that it is not fundamentally correct? Because there are several other factors which also play a role. One important factor is the operating processes. They also intervene in this relationship. Similarly, there is another factor which is the structure of the rocks. They are also playing dominant role in this relationship. Okay. So most of the geomorphologists today, they agree that this is not the case. So in practice, there are usually no evidences for Daviesian assumption that steep slopes are young and gentle slopes are old. In other words, there is fundamental objection to the idea that angle of slopes reveals the age of the landform. So this is wholesale rejection में ये हमारा first point हो गया. Then coming to the second point. ठीक है. Taking this a stage further, a group of geomorphologists led by J.T. Hack have rejected the low entropy closed geomorphic system of W.M. Davis and have argued that all geomorphic systems are open systems where there is continuous export and import of matter and energy. Okay. So for them, landforms are not closed systems as was visualized by Davis. They represent an open system. ठीक है. सो ओपन सिस्टम की क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक होती है? टेल मी. कैन आई से ओपन सिस्टम्स टेंड टू रीच टू एन condition of dynamic equilibrium. So according to them, such geomorphic systems tend to achieve conditions of dynamic equilibrium. Once these conditions are achieved, there need not be further changes in the shape of the landforms. Changes in the shape of the landform will take place when there is, if you talk about change in the processes. Okay, so this is something which has been presented. This is the idea of non साइक्लिक पूल. अब मैं इसको यहां पर एक पॉइंट, इस पॉइंट को समझा देता हूं. बाद में वी विल सी देयर इज इन फैक्ट, आई विल शो यू once we are done with this hill. Can you see this? I will be talking about this in more detail, the non-cyclic view, once we are done till the cycle given by King. So we'll come back to that. ठीक है, बट मैं इसको थोड़ा सा समझा देता हूं सो दैट यू हैव एन आइडिया एंड व्हेन वी डिस्कस द डिटेल यू कैन इंटररिलेट. So think about this, that there is this landform. Okay, so there is this landform. Now in this landform, एक assumption करो कि यहां पर सपोज करते हैं देर आर टू फोर्सेस, दो तरह की फोर्सेस वर्क कर रही हैं. कौन कौन सी फोर्सेस है? रेजिस्टिंग फोर्सेस एंड ऑपरेटिंग फोर्स. तो अ कंडीशन इज रीच्ड. यहां पर रेजिस्टिंग फोर्स कौन सी है? लिथोलॉजी ऑफ द रॉक्स. ठीक है, स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द रॉक्स, दैट इज बेसिकली द रेजिस्टिंग फोर्स. ऑपरेटिंग फोर्स कौन सी है? प्रोसेसेस जो एक्सोजेनेटिक प्रोसेसेस ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं. सपोज करो कि देर इज एन इक्विलिब्रियम बिटवीन स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ, और इसको मैं ऐसे लिखता हूं, रेजिस्टेंस ड्यू टू स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ रॉक्स becomes equal to the strength of exogenetic forces. ठीक है, so suppose this kind of relationship has been achieved. This is a condition of what Hack calls as the dynamic equilibrium. ठीक है, जब ये कंडीशन अचीव हो जाती है डायनेमिक इक्विलिब्रियम की, तो यहां पर क्या हो रहा है कि देयर इज from every part of the landform, from every unit of the landform, same amount of erosion is being done. यानी कि इस लैंडफॉर्म से हर समय every part of this landform experiences the same amount of erosion. ठीक है, सो यहां पर इस लैंडफॉर्म में इरोजन हुआ तो every part of the landform is experiencing same amount of erosion. ठीक है, so here I am writing erosion in time unit 1. Then फिर से इरोजन चालू हो गया। So this is your erosion in time unit 2. Similarly, there is again erosion is taking place. So every part there is same amount of rocks are being eroded. So from every unit of the landform, there is same amount of erosion taking place. So this is your third one, that is erosion in time unit 3. So now tell me, if the landform has reached a condition of dynamic equilibrium, okay, tell me, does it means that the shape of the landform is not changing? In this case, is there any change in the shape of the landform? जल्दी से बताओ मुझे. There is only change in the size. Size is getting reduced. Okay, but we can definitely say that the shape doesn't changes. The slope remains same steep as it was before. Okay. So this idea has been referred to as what? It has been referred to as dynamic equilibrium. The concept of dynamic equilibrium given by J.T. Hack. ठीक है, तो यहां पर यही लिखा हुआ है that according to them geomorphic systems क्या होते हैं? Landforms represent open system जिसमें there is continuous export and import of energy and matter. According to them, such geomorphic systems tend to achieve conditions of dynamic equilibrium. Once these conditions are achieved, there need not be further change in the shape of the landform. तो एक बार लैंडफॉर्म डायनेमिक इक्विलिब्रियम की कंडीशन में पहुंच गया, ठीक है, देन उसके शेप में चेंज नहीं होगा. द वर्क कंटिन्यूज टू बी डन, इरोजन कंटिन्यूज टू बी डन, but it is in such a fashion that from every unit of the landform there is same amount of material being removed, and thus the shape of the landform doesn't change. It doesn't need to change. Can I say the shape of the landform can change only if, how the shape of the landform here can change? Who will tell me? How the shape of the landform can change? Yes, very good. When there is any of these forces change, if the resistance offered by the rocks changes, okay, and either the strength of the exogenetic forces changes, that means या तो जो इंटरनल रॉक्स हैं वो चेंज हो जाए या फिर जो स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ एक्सोजेनेटिक फोर्सेस हैं वो चेंज हो जाए, क्लाइमेट चेंज हो जाए फॉर एग्जांपल, देन ओनली द शेप विल गेट चेंज्ड. चिराग, हियर एक चीज मैं बताना भूल गया कि यहां पर इट इज एज्यूम कर लिया जाता है, एक एजम्पशन है, क्योंकि अभी हम इसको डिटेल में नहीं पढ़ रहे हैं. सो देयर इज ऑल्सो एन एजम्पशन दैट द बेस लेवल remains constant. Like this assumption, as we know, it was also done by W.M. Davis. तो क्योंकि जेटी है डेविस को ही क्रिटिसाइज कर रहा है कि इवन इफ यू एज्यूम दैट देयर इज नो अपलिफ्टमेंट, दैट मीन्स द बेस लेवल इज सेम, then also the landforms will reach what? They will reach this stage of dynamic equilibrium, due to which what will happen? There will be no change in the shape of the landform. I hope I am making it clear. As I have told you, this will come little later in more detail. At this point of time, for basic understanding of what is the non-cyclic school, ठीक है, it should be clear. ठीक है. How same amount of erosion is possible? Prakash, I have told you multiple times. First of all, you have to reach to level of simplicity. You have to develop your imaginary powers more. Many things which we are talking about, our real world inferences may be different. These are theoretical perspectives which we are talking about. ठीक है, और ऐसा हो सकता है. हम बाद में देखेंगे कि अगर डिस्टेंस ऑफ द रिवर्स इज सेम, ठीक है, लाइक किसी एरिया के अंदर हमें दिखाई पड़ रहा है कि जो रिवर्स हैं दे आर स्पेस्ड एट ऑलमोस्ट सिमिलर डिस्टेंस फ्रॉम ईच अदर, it is possible that every part of the landform is eroded in, if you talk about, similar amount. ठीक है. And when this will be happening, when the rock structure is also same. Suppose उस पूरे एरिया में हमें सैंडस्टोन ही मिल रहा है. Okay. So this is your non-cyclic school. But हम बाद में देखेंगे. मुझे एक चीज बताओ, ये नॉन साइक्लिक स्कूल, चलो ठीक है कि ये जो बात बोल रहा है ये पॉसिबल है, दिस इज पॉसिबल. जो मैंने अभी यहां पर एक एग्जांपल दिया कि ये पॉसिबल है कि सपोज ये पूरे एरिया में एक ही तरह की रॉक मिल रही है हमें, यानी कि स्ट्रक्चर सेम है और जो प्रोसेसेस ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं वो भी सेम हो जा रहे हैं, बिकॉज यहां पर जो टेक्सचर ऑफ ड्रेनेज है वो यूनिफॉर्म हो जा रहा है. ठीक है, रिवर्स आर यूनिफॉर्मली स्पेस्ड, तो हर पार्ट से उतना ही लगभग इरोजन हो रहा है. But tell me, can I say कि what he is saying, this can be taken to be a reality in short period of time? ठीक है, ये सब ठीक है, शॉर्ट पीरियड ऑफ टाइम तक ठीक है. बट क्या अगर साइज में रिडक्शन हो रहा है, सपोज दिस वॉज द सी लेवल, ठीक है, सपोज दिस इज द सी लेवल, हियर आई हैव ड्रॉन द सी लेवल. तो टेल मी, इफ देयर इज reduction in the size of the landform, does it means, remember हमने देखा था कि अगर पहले लैंडफॉर्म यहां पर था, अगर ठीक है मान लेते हैं कि भाई चलो तुम्हारी बात सही है कि ये इस तरह से रिड्यूस हो रहा है और उसमें शेप चेंज नहीं हो रहा, ठीक है, बट टेल मी, कैन आई से कि क्या एक ऐसा टाइम आएगा जब उसका साइज इतना रिड्यूस हो जाएगा कि दिस विल लीड टू साइज रिडक्शन, विल लीड टू चेंजेस इन क्लाइमेट? यस और नो? क्या मैंने इस पॉइंट को पहले भी बताया है? तो व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू से, इन वेरी लॉन्ग geological period, there is enough size reduction so that there is even change in the climate. हमने देखा है कि अगर ऊंचाई ज्यादा है, if the height is more, what will happen with temperatures? Temperatures will be low. And what will be the case of precipitation? Precipitation will be higher. But what will happen if the size is reduced? There will be increase in temperature and decrease in available precipitation. So if there is change in climate, does it means that it will inevitably lead to change in operating geomorphic processes? Yes or no? And if the operating processes are changing, can I say there will be inevitable change in the shape of the landforms? Yes or no? What I have written here, can we safely assume that this will happen? Tell me. That is something else. One can argue that whether it will happen in the same way which Davis says, that there will be slope decline होगा या फिर parallel retreat होगा, ये अलग बात है. Or there will be, for example, the phenomena of back wasting होगा, ठीक है, slope replacement and back wasting होगा. This is different thing. But one thing is very clear, will there be change in the shape of the landform when you extend this for long period of time? Obviously, yes. And thus we can safely say one thing, that non-cyclic idea is correct, but its correctness is limited to smaller scale of time. When we talk about long periods of geological time like the cyclic time, there will be inevitable changes in the shape of the landform because of the changes in the processes. Okay, which was the basic idea given by Davis. Okay, so one can argue कि exactly वैसा ही नहीं होगा, decline ही नहीं होगा. There may be retreat, but there cannot be an argument which says that if you talk about, there will be no such kind of change in the shape of the land. I hope you get my point. Tell me fast. ठीक है, so यहाँ पर यही point लिखा हुआ है. So whether time independent evolution of landform is correct or time independent development is true is a matter of research. One thing is sure, that non-cyclic view is an attempt to study landforms with respect to smaller geomorphic scales, because as time passes by, there would be inevitable changes in energy available with the landforms. This would lead to changes in processes which would inevitably cause changes in the shape. Okay. It is another matter that whether such changes in shape would be similar to that as envisaged by Davis or would be in a different manner is a subject of debate. Okay. Thus, despite all his shortcomings, Davis should be given credit for giving adequate focus to role of time in evolution of landforms. Before narrowly criticizing his ideas, it must be kept in mind that his basic objective was to formulate an ideal model which can be reference point for field investigation of landforms. In fact, many of the criticisms leveled against Davis had already been acknowledged by him. ठीक है, remember मैंने वो पढ़ के बताया था of Davis, some of the lines which Davis himself had acknowledged before. So for the sake of simplicity, let us suppose that landmass on which an original river has begun its work stands perfectly still after its first elevation or deformation, and so remains until the river has completed its task of carrying away all the mass of rocks that rise above its base level. Okay. A complete cycle is long measure of time in regions of great elevation of hard rocks. But whether or not any river ever passed through a single cycle of life without interruption, we need not now inquire. Our purpose is only to learn what changes it would experience if it did thus develop steadily from infancy to old age without disturbance. I hope I am clear. Tell me. यहाँ पर भी मैंने दिया था, इनफैक्ट लिखवाया था क्लास के अंदर. So for example, in his normal cycle, Davis writes, for the sake of simplicity, let us suppose the landmass on which an original river has begun its work stands perfectly still after its first elevation. In saying so, it must be acknowledged that there would be erosion even during the process of uplift. However, our basic objective should be to formulate an ideal model, and then only for an exceptional cases and then only look for the exceptional cases and variabilities. Thus, Davis should be seen as a perfectionist who ultimately tried to transform the subject of geomorphology, despite all its limitation, into a modern science. You have to understand the limitations in which they were working. Davis was working way before. If you talk about, for example, Wegener. Wegener was working in 1912. Davis had given at least 13 years before Wegener his concept. And at that time, knowledge of the interior of the earth was very limited. So, in such a circumstances, he had to base his studies on several assumptions. ठीक है. So this is something which is we can write. अब मैं appraisal में एक और चीज बताता हूं जो तुम ऐड कर सकते हो. लास्ट में इफ यू हैव टू राइट कंक्लूजन, ठीक है, तो कंक्लूजन में वी कैन कंक्लूड समथिंग which is like very recent thing. So conclusion में we can talk about plate tectonics and Lewisian cycle. ठीक है. So number of things stand out when we study the plate tectonics theory and compare it with the Lewisian cycle of erosion. तो डेविस का एक आइडिया है, वो ये कहता है कि देयर इज शॉर्ट लिव्ड रैपिड इरोजन पीरियड, सॉरी इरोजन लिख रहा हूं, रैपिड अपलिफ्टमेंट. शॉर्ट लिव्ड रैपिड अपलिफ्टमेंट पीरियड. ठीक है. अब मुझे ये बताओ, क्या हमने पढ़ा है कि प्लेट टेक्टोनिक्स थ्योरी ये कहती है कि इफ वी लुक इन द एंटायर अर्थ हिस्ट्री, अर्थ हिस्ट्री, ठीक है, एंटायर अर्थ हिस्ट्री कितना लंबा है? Have we seen that which is at least 4.5 billion years? Yes or no? Have we seen that the entire earth history is at least 4.5 billion years? There have been short six to seven episodes of mountain building, comma, each of which lasted for just few million years. Yes or no? क्या हमने देखा था कि there was in the, for example, in the Precambrian, there was 3 to 4 episodes of mountain building. Then if you talk about in the Paleozoic, there were 2 episodes. क्या क्या नाम थे उनके? Remember, first, if we saw that there was Caledonian and another was Hercynian, and there was no such mountain building episode in the Mesozoic. Then comes the Tertiary, and in Tertiary there was young, old mountain building. तो पूरी अर्थ हिस्ट्री जो कि 4.5 बिलियन ईयर्स ओल्ड है, उसमें टोटल 6 to 7 हमें क्या दिखाई पड़ते हैं? माउंटेन बिल्डिंग एपिसोड्स मिलते हैं। और हर एपिसोड का जो पीरियड है, इट इज जस्ट फ्यू मिलियन ईयर्स। तो व्हाट वी आर सेइंग इज ईच एपिसोड lasted for only few million years. ठीक है? Tell me now, can we say these few million years of each episode, when compared with entire Earth's history, when compared with the entire Earth's history, looks short-lived, rapid upliftment period. Yes or no? जल्दी से बताओ, इज इट ट्रू? तो एक चीज बहुत क्लियर हो रही है, दैट व्हाट डेविस वाज सेइंग टू सम एक्सटेंट इट हैज बीन प्रूव्ड बाय द प्लेट टेक्टोनिक्स थ्योरी। ठीक है? दूसरी बात, सेकंड बात डेविस ने बोली है साइक्लिक डेवलपमेंट। ठीक है? और ये साइक्लिक डेवलपमेंट में होता क्या है? देयर इज अ सरफेस which is peneplain like surface. ठीक है? This peneplain like surface ultimately happens to what? It is experiencing upliftment. After upliftment, what happens? It passes through a cycle of erosion in which it passes from youth to mature to finally old. And tell me, does after this does it becomes peneplain like surface? So can we call this a cyclic development of Davis? And this seems to be upheld this idea seems to be upheld by the plate tectonics theory. ठीक है, so plate tectonics theory agrees with the idea of geosynclinal cycles. So tell me, so if you talk about the geosynclinal cycle, like अगर हम कोबर का साइकिल लें, तो is there the phenomena of lithogenesis, which is essentially going towards orogenesis, and then it is followed by what? Leptogenesis, similarly we talked about in Davisian cycle there is a penny plane. Penny plane experiences what? It experiences upliftment, and then what happens to it? It undergoes cycle of erosion. क्या ये दोनों एक जैसे दिख रहे हैं? Tell me, does they look similar? ठीक है, so can we agree one thing in final conclusion, that what Davis was saying may not be absolutely correct. There may be many shortcomings in what he was saying. ठीक है, but few things thus looks like the present paradigm seems to agree with what Davis talked about. And these two things, one, as we talked about, the upliftment, nature of upliftment, and second, if you talk about, is the cyclic development. ठीक है, अब यहां पर आर्ग्यूमेंट हो सकता है कि विद इन साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन एग्जैक्टली यूथ मैच्योर ओल्ड वैसा होगा नहीं होगा, बट फाइनली दिस काइंड ऑफ सिचुएशन शुड बी टेकिंग प्लेस. ठीक है, कैन वी मूव ऑन नाउ? So this point, these points were not written here. You can add those points of plate tectonics towards when you are concluding it. Then later discourse of W.M. Davis. अब इसकी भी बात कर लेते हैं. ठीक है, so I was writing in 2009 sorry, 2009 में एक क्वेश्चन आता है, and this question was something like landforms. I'll just talk about landforms associated with second cycle of erosion. So landforms associated with second cycle of erosion. Can you check anyone who has right now access to the PYQs, whether this question was in 2009 में आया था या 2010 में आया था, तो चेक करके मुझे बता सकता है अभी? Landforms associated with the second cycle of erosion. ठीक है, सेकेंड साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन। इसी तरह से एक स्टेटमेंट पहले आया था इससे 2006 में, एंड दिस स्टेटमेंट वाज, इसको एग्जामिन करना था, आई थिंक स्ट्रक्चर इज द डोमिनेंट कंट्रोलिंग फैक्टर इन लैंडफॉर्म इवोल्यूशन। ठीक है, तो ये 2006 में पहले आ चुका था, 2009 में ये क्वेश्चन आ गया। अब आई स्टिल रिमेंबर कि when this question was essentially asked, everyone was like surprised. Okay, everyone was surprised. Even my roommate who was a geologist, he was also surprised. And after consultation with many other people who were writing the mains, my friends and others whom I met there on the examination center, majority of them had written what? This second cycle of erosion, they equated it with the mature stage, the second stage of cycle of erosion. But somehow I was of different view. I felt that it is something else. This question was asking. There is a chapter in, it was, Sasti is correct, highlight the geomorphic features essentially found in topographies under the second cycle of erosion. Okay. So I was of the view that this is something related with a chapter hai Savinder Singh geomorphology में, and that is chapter on rejuvenation of landform. तो बाद में देखेंगे rejuvenation is a process where the erosive capacity of the river increases. अब ये कई रीजन से इंक्रीज हो सकता है. इट कैन बी डायनेमिक रिजुवनेशन से हो सकता है, इट कैन बी ईयूस्टेटिक रिजुवनेशन से हो सकता है, इट कैन बी ऑल्सो सिंपली बिकॉज ऑफ स्टैटिक रिजुवनेशन, वट एवर बी द कॉज. ठीक है, तो इसका मतलब है कि एक लैंडफॉर्म विच वॉज गोइंग थ्रू साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन वो दोबारा एक तरह से अपलिफ्ट हो गया. तब क्या होगा, तब किस तरह के लैंडफॉर्म्स बने. तो इफ यू रीड थ्रू, बाद में हम इसको पढ़ने वाले हैं, तो वी विल सी दैट नंबर ऑफ टाइप्स, लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल सपोज वन टाइप you'll find कि एक लैंडफॉर्म होता है जिसको बोलते हैं हम निक पॉइंट. another like for example along the coast you can find that the coast can become like this terraced coastline. There can be एलुवियल टेरेसेस, इस तरह के एलुवियल टेरेसेस बन जाते हैं. ठीक है, तो ये सब उसमें बुक में लिखा हुआ है. मेरे को लगा कि ये उसी से रिलेटेड है कि अगर वापस से रेज हो जाएगा तो क्या होगा, बिकॉज आई हैड स्टडीड द डिवीजन साइकिल. क्रिटिसिज्म बहुत अच्छे से मैंने पढ़ रखा. उसी के बेसिस पर मैंने जो समझ में आया, मुझे ये कुछ कुछ चीज़ें याद आई एंड आई रोट आउट. Later, I definitely found that my version, my interpretation was correct. Obviously, you can understand कि at that time, because I had already started teaching also, तो उस समय मैं पढ़ाना भी शुरू कर चुका था. तो एज अ टीचर मेरे अंदर फियर था कि भाई अब तो स्टूडेंट्स इसको पूछेंगे. तो essentially, if you talk about, I like started little bit of research on it, and then one thing I found that in the books there is in 1899, ठीक है, द साइकिल का कंसेप्ट आता है, फिर उसका क्रिटिसिज्म होता है, And the most famous books, even for example Savinder Singh, there is the end of it. यहीं पे खत्म हो जाता है. But this was not the end. As we have seen before, even after this criticism, Davis was a kind of perfectionist. He continued to work. He tried to answer his critiques. And he continued to extend his idea of cycle of erosion. In this one of the answer to the critique, he came up with the concept of second cycle of erosion. Towards one of the critiques, okay, he was further criticized for use of his word normal. ठीक है, तो उसको आंसर करते करते उसने दो और साइकिल दे दी, एरिड साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन और ग्लेशियल साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन. ठीक है, देयर वाज हिज वन क्रिटिसिज्म वाज ही नेग्लेक्टेड द रोल ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर. उसका क्रिटिसिज्म भी का भी आंसर उसने दिया. तो ये जो स्टोरी है वो वहीं पे खत्म नहीं होती है. ठीक है, और जब मैंने ये चीज पढ़ी तब मेरे को समझ में आया, देन आई वाज एबल टू रिलेट दिस क्वेश्चन ऑफ 2006. I was able to relate this 2009 question. In fact, I still remember in 2013, I was teaching in the class arid cycle. ठीक है, तो arid cycle पढ़ाने के बाद मैंने स्टूडेंट्स को बोला, let us talk about comparison of normal cycle and arid cycle, because both these were given by Davis. And since it was, if you talk about 2009 में ये क्वेश्चन पूछ चुका है, क्योंकि डेविस ने बाद में थ्री क्रिटिसिज्म्स को ज्यादा महत्व दिया. ठीक है, एंड दीज थ्री क्रिटिसिज्म ही एक्चुअली आंसर्ड. तो इन तीन क्रिटिसिज्म्स में से वी हैड सीन दैट टू ऑफ देम वर ऑलरेडी आस्क्ड. स्ट्रक्चर के बारे में पूछा जा चुका था एंड सेकेंड साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन के बारे में पूछा जा चुका था. ठीक है, one criticism which was left was related with process. So I told the students that ये question की compare the normal cycle with the arid cycle of erosion of Davis can any time be asked in the exam. And Sasti, can you check that? I think if I remember correctly, this question was asked in 2013 itself. Compare the normal cycle with the arid cycle of erosion of Davis. ठीक है, और इससे पता चलता है कि बहुत सारे जो बीच में क्वेश्चंस पूछे थे उनका कंटेक्स्ट क्या था पूछने का. तो दिस इज द पार्ट विच वेयर वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट द लेटर डिस्कोर्स ऑफ W.M. Davis cycle of erosion. ठीक है, so following his widespread criticism, particularly from the mainland Europe, Davis attended to these critical points and later through several papers between 1904 and 1909 came up with answers to these criticisms. In particular, Davis answered three types of criticisms related with the idea with criticism. ठीक है, तो यहां पर एक्चुअली मैं three type of criticisms. So पहला criticism, this first criticism, you can call it as the first complication. So first complication was related with, एक उसका assumption था about base level stability. ठीक है, about base levels being stable. Historical study और geological history की अगर हम study करें तो बहुत clear हो जाता है कि the base level cannot remain stable for so much long period of time. For example, we studied about Pleistocene epoch. क्या हमने इसके बारे में पढ़ा है? Who will tell me when did the Pleistocene epoch started? When did the Pleistocene epoch started? क्या हमने पढ़ा है कि इट स्टार्टेड समवेयर अराउंड 1.6 million years ago, and it lasted for about 10,000 years ago. यहां से इसके बाद क्या स्टार्ट होता है प्लीस्टोसीन में? होलोसीन, इफ यू रिमेंबर, यस और नो? तो यानी कि ओवरऑल जो प्लीस्टोसीन इपोक का पीरियड है वो मात्र कितना है? इट इज ओनली 1.6 million years. And in this 1.6 million years, have we seen that there were at least 4 glacial and 4 interglacial phases? Yes or no? Have we talked about this? So tell me, if there is 4 glacial and 4 interglacial phases, does it means that it will lead to, it would have led to changes in the global sea levels? And if there was changes in the global sea level, what impact it will have on the base level? Can I say it will inevitably cause changes in the base level of erosion? तो इतने कम पीरियड में देर आर 8, इवन इफ यू एज्यूम कि एक बार में सब चेंज हो गया, एक बार में बढ़ गया, एक बार में घट गया, तब जाकर के तब भी हमें क्या दिखाई पड़ रहा है? देर आर 8 such base level changes in such a short period of time. I hope you are getting my point. And here we are not talking about the tectonic phenomena. If you even take into account, for example, the case of tectonic phenomena, if there is like this kind of folded strata, तो इस folded strata में क्या होगा? You will be finding that river will cut its V-shaped and if there is cutting of the V-shaped valleys, what will be taking place? Can I say it amounts to unloading? Does it amounts to unloading? Yes or no? And if there is amount of does it amounts to unloading, then will it lead to isostatic upliftment? ठीक है, it will inevitably lead to isostatic upliftment. And if this is taking place, it becomes very clear that the assumption of base level stability for extended geological time is what? It is over simplification of reality. It is essentially oversimplification of reality. ठीक है, so this is something which was the criticism of Davis. तो यहां पर देखते हैं, Davis accepted that cycle might be interrupted by renewed uplift, which may cause rejuvenation of landscape. Rejuvenation क्या होता है? अगर सपोज करो कि वापस अपलिफ्टमेंट हो गया, अगर यहां पर ये आइसोस्टेटिक अपलिफ्ट होता है तो वापस लैंडफॉर्म विल बी अपलिफ्टेड. फॉर एग्जाम्पल दिस आइसोस्टेटिक अपलिफ्ट की बात करें तो इसका एक बहुत अच्छा एग्जाम्पल है लास्ट मेजर हिमालयन upliftment phase occurred at the end of Pleistocene due to isostatic uplift. Isostatic upliftment. So can you understand कि जब प्लीस्टोसीन आइस एज खत्म हुआ होगा तो उसके बाद देयर वुड हैव बीन नंबर वन मेल्टिंग ऑफ ग्लेशियर्स. बिफोर during the ice age the glaciers would have occupied very large part of the Himalayas. So there would have been shortening of the glaciers, उससे कुछ unloading हुई, and by that time the rivers had also cut their V-shaped valleys deeper. That also would have led to unloading, and this would have led to the upliftment of the Himalayas towards the end of the Pleistocene. ठीक है. So when there is such kind of upliftment, this isostatic uplift, can I say one thing is, इसको हम बोलते हैं it will lead to rejuvenation. Rejuvenation क्या है? Technically speaking, rejuvenation refers to increase in the erosive capacity of the rivers. This is what we technically mean by the term rejuvenation. So increase in the erosive capacity of the rivers. अगर upliftment हो गया तो river क्या further deep incision कर सकती है? Tell me, can the river cut further deeper? Because with respect to the landform, now the base level has fallen down. I hope you are appreciating what I am saying. तो डेविस का कहना था कि इट वुड इंटरप्ट द साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन, का इंटरप्शन हो जाएगा. ठीक है. और इंटरप्शन अगर होता है तो सपोज करो कि द साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन वाज पासिंग फ्रॉम यूथ टू मैच्योर टू ओल्ड. ठीक है. दिस वाज द पैसेज ऑफ द साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन. तो इंटरप्शन कहीं पर भी हो सकता है. ठीक है. सपोज हियर देयर इज interruption. So if there is interruption taking place here, वापस से अगर अपलिफ्टमेंट हो गया तो टेल मी, क्या वापस लैंडफॉर्म में वही लेवल ऑफ एनर्जी आ जाएगी जो कि उसके पास यूथ पीरियड में थी? यस और नो? Will the landform have same level of energy which it had in the youth period? तो इस इंटरप्शन के बाद क्या होगा? साइकिल वापस कहां पे पहुंच जाएगी? यूथ में पहुंच जाएगी. या फिर इंटरप्शन यहां पर हो सकता है. अगर इंटरप्शन यहां पर होता है तो फिर से साइकिल किधर पहुंच जाएगी? यूथ में पहुंच जाएगी. और फिर से क्या हो जाएगा? अगेन दिस ऑपरेशन ऑफ द साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन will take place. So what will happen? Interruption will lead to what? Will lead to increase in energy levels similar to youth stage. ठीक है, thus what will happen, cycle will restart from the youth stage after interruption. ठीक है, this cycle is referred to as what? He calls it as the second cycle of erosion. Davis calls this as the second cycle of erosion. ठीक है, so this would lead to development of some youthful forms which would coexist with the older forms. ठीक है, however, he was still adamant about his idea of cycle of erosion and believed that the change after rejuvenation would be again cyclic. Thus, rejuvenation episode would interrupt an ongoing cycle of erosion and would start a second cycle of erosion, which would follow the same sequence of youth, mature, and old. Thus, he conceded that polycyclic landscapes would be more commonly found rather than monocyclic landscapes. पहला उसका जो थ्योरी था 1899 का, उसमें क्या कहता है, there is monocyclic development, एक साइकिल चल रहा है. But he later accepts that polycyclic development will be more commonly found. I hope this point is clear. बट इसमें भी क्या एक चीज देख सकते हो तुम लोग कि वो यहां पर भी क्या कर रहा है, इज ही डूइंग ओवर सिंप्लीफिकेशन हियर ऑल्सो? Is he doing oversimplification here also? Think about this idea that interruptions, we are saying interruptions, but what if interruptions are too many and too frequent? Tell me, what if the interruptions are too many and too frequent? Will you be able to recognize the operation of cycle in this case? Tell me, क्या उसमें पहचान पाओगे कि साइकिल चल रही है, नहीं चल रही है, क्या हो रहा है? And the real thing is that interruptions in open landforms, because landforms represent open systems, interruptions are actually too many and too frequent. हम बाद में रिजुवनेशन जब पढ़ेंगे तो हम देखेंगे कि रिजुवनेशन केवल डायनामिक नहीं होता. ठीक है, वी विल सी दैट rejuvenation can occur because of three processes. One type is dynamic. It is related with tectonic phenomena, but it can also be eustatic, which is related with global sea level changes से हो सकता है. Which is again अभी हमने देखा प्लीस्टोसीन में कम से कम 8 ऐसे सी लेवल चेंजेस थे इतने शॉर्ट पीरियड में. एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, देयर कैन बी ऑल्सो स्टैटिक रिजुवनेशंस कैन ऑल्सो टेक प्लेस. ठीक है, हम बाद में देखेंगे स्टैटिक रिजुवनेशन कैन बी रिजल्ट ऑफ changes in the discharge in the river, changes in the sediment carried by the river. ये सब से भी रिजुवनेशंस हो सकते हैं. ठीक है, so they are too frequent. So even when he is dealing with the complexity, he tends towards what? He tends towards simplification. सेकेंड कॉम्प्लिकेशन अगर हम डेविस के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, जो डेविस ने एक्नॉलेज किया It was Davis effectively represented landscape development under humid, temperate, morphoclimatic regime of his home area in northeastern US as normal. जो अभी हमने क्रिटिसिज्म किया था कि अपने एरिया का जो क्लाइमेट था उसी को उसने क्या वर्ड यूज किया, नॉर्मल. इससे ये आइडिया जाता है, इट बिकम्स लाइक दिस, देयर इज एन इंप्रेशन that humid temperate climates are or humid climates are the normal climates found everywhere in the world, which is far away from reality. The climates he was talking about, they don't even represent 1/3 of the world area, even less than that. Okay. As a result, there was very severe criticism from mainland Europe because it represented what? That he was neglecting the role of process. So there was severe criticism which came from mainland Europe. He accepted that detailed nature of landform evolution under different prevailing climates would not be identical because of the variations in the intensity of geomorphic processes under different morphoclimatic regimes will be variable. तो मैं दिखाता हूं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल हम इसको देखेंगे बाद में. Can you see this? This was the if you talk about morphoclimatic zones, पेल्टियर का यहाँ पर देख सकते हो morphoclimatic regions दिया हुआ है. Can you see similar type of diagram जो हमने वहां पर दिखाया था? There is glacial, if you talk about glacial climates, there is periglacial climates, there is boreal climates, there is maritime, selva, moderate, savanna, semi-arid and arid. So variety of type of climates which are present in this world. And Peltier फिर उसके बाद बताता है कि कैसे, for example in glacial, what is the mean annual temperature? It is between Fahrenheit के terms में it is 0 to 20, mean annual rainfall inches में 0 to 45. तो यहाँ पर what type of processes are more active? Glacial erosion, evasion, wind action. Periglacial में different मिल रहा है तो वहाँ पर different processes मिल रहे हैं and intensity of processes vary. Boreal has different temperature and precipitation regimes, so there is different type of processes and intensity of processes are operating. Same way there is maritime, there is selva, there is moderate, there is savanna, semi-arid, arid. So all of these have different precipitation and different temperature and precipitation regimes, and thus the type and intensity of the processes vary. ठीक है. तो डेविस ऑल्सो एक्नॉलेज दिस कि जब क्लाइमेट वैरी करेगा तो उससे क्या होगा, देयर विल बी डिफरेंस इन द प्रोसेसेस ड्यू टू विच साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन वेरिएंट्स, उसके डिटेल ऑफ साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन कैन बी डिफरेंट. ठीक है. तो टू शो केस दिस उसने क्या किया, फर्स्ट इन 1904, ठीक है, उसने एक दूसरी साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन दी. नॉर्मल के बजाय उसने दिया डेजर्ट साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन, या फिर बेटर एक्चुअली डेजर्ट नहीं वर्ड है ये, एरिड साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन. तो ही गेव द कंसेप्ट ऑफ एरिड साइकिल ऑफ इरोजन. एंड लेटर आई थिंक इट वाज 1907 या 1909 में, आई थिंक इट वाज 1907 व्हेन ही गेव द कंसेप्ट ऑफ glacial cycle of erosion. ठीक है, glacial cycle of erosion. ठीक है. अब इससे एक चीज पता चलती है, इफ आई जस्ट आस्क यू वन क्वेश्चन, विच एरिया डू यू थिंक इज द ड्राइएस्ट प्लेस ऑन अर्थ? विच इज द ड्राइएस्ट डेजर्ट ऑन द अर्थ? Which is the driest desert on earth? The driest desert on earth is Antarctica. Sagar is very correct. It is Antarctica is the driest desert on earth. Antarctica mein there are places which have not received precipitation from millions of years. Forget about years. Okay, so you must be aware desert, when we are saying desert का technical definition क्या होता है? These are places which have less than 25 centimeter of precipitation. Okay, so there can be two type of deserts, hot deserts and cold deserts. That means polar subpolar areas are also what? Technically they represent deserts. Hot deserts may no doubt the driest one is Atacama Desert. Okay, so when he is giving the arid cycle of erosion and glacial cycle of erosion, इससे एक बात बहुत clearly पता चलती है. And what is that? That he divided world climates into how many types? He divided the world climates into two types. One type of climates, according to him, were which type? Humid. And other type of climates, according to him, were dry climates. ठीक है, उसने जो ह्यूमिड क्लाइमेट्स थे उनको क्या बोला? He called such climates as normal climates. Dry climates he referred as these are exceptional climates या फिर they are some exceptions. ठीक है, नॉर्मल क्लाइमेट्स में उसके हिसाब से क्या हो रहा था? ठीक है, रिवर प्लेड डोमिनेंट रोल. ठीक है, यहां पर अदर प्रोसेसेस also played important role. ठीक है, तो उसके हिसाब से फिर से देखो उसने क्या किया. हमने अभी देखा था, had we seen that world में there are so many types of climates, at least 9 type of climates were identified by Peltier. ठीक है, there is this another classification where you can see humid, tropical, tropical wet and dry, tropical semi-arid, tropical arid, humid mid-latitude, dry continental, periglacial, glacial. Then there is mountainous climates. ठीक है, so different type of climates are found in the world. But what he has done, has he led to oversimplification here also? Has he oversimplified here also when he is dividing all these type into two broad types, humid and dry? So he had already given for these humid climates normal cycle of erosion, which he told that it will work at majority of places. While for dry, he gave exceptional cycle of erosion. ठीक है, and exceptional cycle of erosion में arid and the glacial cycle of erosion was given by. ठीक है, so I hope it is clear. So because consequently he developed arid and glacial versions of cycle of erosion, while his later disciples of his evolution approach added further variants. It can be argued that Davis was still adamant with his concept of normal being humid temperate climates. Thus, for the name's sake, he dealt with the cyclic evolution in extreme or exceptional climates of arid and polar areas, while he felt that rest of the world would follow his normal cycle of erosion. Okay, I hope this point is clear. Tell me. Third complication was provided on lithology and structure of rocks. We had seen that in his own statement. First he says landforms are function of structure, process and time, and then he goes on to develop a theory on time rather than on structure or process. So third criticism was the role of process. Davis also acknowledged that process can do what? Process can have its own control. So provided lithology and structure, which Davis saw as exerting specific control on landscape evolution, largely through their influence on drainage pattern. Tell me, have we seen that each type of structure will be characterized by specific type of pattern? Yes or no? So tell me, what type of, if we talk about structure here and drainage pattern here, tell me, what type of pattern we found to be present on folded landform? फटाफट बताओ, what type of drainage pattern had we seen in folded landforms? क्या हमने देखा था कि folded landforms में there is तुम लोग को ब्रेक मिलता है तो तुम लोग करते क्या हो? छुट्टी मनाते हो? तो डेविस का ये मानना था, डेविस बिलीव्ड that variations in the detail of the operation of cycle of erosion will be taking place. And how these changes will be occurring? Because each type of rock structure is associated with specific type of drainage pattern. And due to different type of drainage pattern, there may be some differences in the details of operation of cycle. But whatever be the details, changes in detail, cycle will always pass through the three stages of youth, mature and old age. So the ultimate plan of the cycle will not change. Only details in the cycle will be changing. This point is clear, tell me. So however, he maintained that such controls would become progressively less significant as the cycle of erosion proceeded. The cycle of erosion would ultimately achieve its end, that is, changes would be sequential through youth, mature and old age. Okay. Thus, Davis did not felt he need to provide a separate caste cycle of erosion. Okay. because karst landforms, they represent a different structure, as he believed that karst development represented that mature stage of normal cycle of erosion. So the changes which are taking place in karst, they are more related with what is happening in the mature stage of cycle of erosion. By the end of mature stage, it will become same as mature stage of cycle of erosion. But हम later देखेंगे his later disciples. Remember we talked about Visage and BD. They developed the karst cycle of erosion as well. So this was the division idea on cycle of erosion. ठीक है? I hope it is clear. Now let us move on to the study of Walther Penck's. यहाँ पे वॉल्टर लिखा हुआ है, एक्चुअली हियर वॉल्थर होगा, THER है. Walther Penck's morphological model of landform development. So as we have seen that although division model began to be criticized, particularly after 1915, particularly after the 1919 के बाद, First World War के बाद, there was widespread criticism of division model. But even before that, there was a very famous geomorphologist who was from Germany, and he had so many objections related with the division cycle of erosion. पहले भी मैंने बताया, Penck was particularly critical of Davis of two things. ठीक है? So what were those two things? For particularly two aspects, and one, if you talk about, was related with neglect of process, and second, if you talk about, was over simplification. ठीक है? So neglect of process and oversimplification. Sastri, I have told you specifically, class में मैंने, I have like repeated it multiple times. Structure, neglect of structure was also criticism of Penck. Didn't I do so? Okay. So these are the two main things. So if you look at Penck, very clearly, unlike Davis, who was a geomorphologist, Penck was basically what? He was a geologist. Okay? He was a geologist. And if you talk about, as we said, Davis, he was essentially a geomorphologist. That means Davis was particularly what? He was a geographer. पहले भी मैंने बताया है, दोनों का ओरिएंटेशन क्या होता है, बिल्कुल अलग है. जियोलॉजी इज व्हाट? कैन आई से इट इज एसेंशियली अ process science, and geomorphology is what? It is basically a spatial science. ठीक है? So thus what happens, we can say that Thus, there is a big difference in the approach and objectives of the two. There is big difference in the approach and objectives of the two. For example, in case of geology, focus is more on study of processes, including understanding of endogenetic processes. On the other hand, if you talk about in case of geomorphology, process or processes are studied just as a means to achieve an end. And what is essentially the end? Understanding development of understanding the development of the landform. So this is the basic difference between both of them, and thus you can understand Fink was a geologist who very much believed in the processes, study of the processes. Okay, and thus he was highly critical of Davis, who had neglected the processes and led to so much of oversimplification. Fink was also a very hardcore field geologist, and he could see, because of his work in the field, that reality is much more complex, and thus he wanted to develop a model which can replicate what reality is. I hope it is clear. Tell me. So Penk's ideas on landform development were posthumously published in the form of Die morphologische Analysis in 1924. Okay. So he had done his work before the First World War. It was also becoming famous, but because he died early, ultimately his work could be only posthumously published. Okay. Penk's perception of geomorphology differed significantly from W.M. Davis, and he pleaded for rejection of Davisian model based on time dependent series of landform development. Instead, he presented his own morphological system where landform development was essentially function of interplay between various geomorphic processes. The main objective of Penk's model was to obtain information that might contribute to understanding of Earth's crustal movement, that means endogenetic forces. So Davis में objective क्या था? Genetic classification of landform. Can you see here the difference is, here the main objective is different. He in turn want to understand the processes. Okay, so tell me, his idea is based upon the assumption that landforms, if you talk about, they are representative of interplay between endogenetic and exogenetic forces. ठीक है, this was what he believed. Now tell me, can I say out of these three variables, कौन से variable, which of these three, out of these three variables, which one is more complex to directly see, which cannot be directly seen? Can I say it is endogenetic because it is produced from deep inside the earth surface? So you cannot directly see it, you cannot directly measure it, it is very difficult. Okay, but exogenetic is something which we can see. We can see that river, when it is moving, river is doing what? River is cutting the rocks. We can see that when winds are moving, winds will do erosion, deposition, etc., etc. So these things we can see. Can I say landforms also we can see? It is something which is very visible phenomena. So if landform is reflection of interplay between endogenetic and exogenetic processes, so tell me, if I study this, through this study, will I be able to know this relationship? And through that, will I be able to know this? Yes or no? It is something like, if I provide you an analogy, okay, this is something which we know, which we can see. So suppose this is 100 is equal to x minus 40. From this equation, can you calculate the value of x? Tell me. Can you calculate the value of x here? What will be the value of x? Can I say the value of x here will be 60? I hope you are getting my point. हाँ सॉरी 140 होगा ना, ठीक है, 60 नहीं होगा, 140 होगा, माइनस है, ठीक है, उधर जा करके प्लस हो जाएगा. ओके, तो हियर इफ यू टॉक अबाउट 100 इज इक्वल टू x माइनस 40, यानी कि ये 140 हो गया. अब मुझे ये बताओ कि डू यू गेट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ पेंक, what he is trying to do? So if I study landform and if I study exogenetic processes, can I understand the nature of endogenetic forces, how they operate? So this is what is written here. The main objective of Penk's model was to obtain information that might contribute to the understanding of Earth's crustal movement, that is endogenetic forces. Okay. He was of the view that landforms are function of interplay between endogenetic and exogenetic forces. The shape of the landforms vary depending upon the ratio between endogenetic and exogenetic forces. Since exogenetic forces and landforms could be seen directly, they should be used to understand the nature of endogenetic forces. Okay, so that is basically his theory. Now, like Division model, ठीक है, अब यहाँ से हम थ्योरी की बात कर रहे हैं उसकी. Like the Division model, his theory is also which type? He has also presented a deductive model, which is based upon several assumptions. ठीक है, तो इसके मॉडल में हम क्या क्या पढ़ेंगे थ्योरी के अंदर? We'll study, in case of Penk's theory, we'll start with the assumptions. From assumptions, we will move on to the propositions of the model, And in the proposition of the models, we will see that there are three phases which he talks about in case of development. One is the waxing phase से start होता है सब कुछ. Then comes the uniform phase of development, and then comes the, if you talk about, waning phase. ठीक है. अब यूनिफॉर्म में भी हम देखेंगे कि इसके भी तीन पार्ट्स हैं, A, B and C. There are three sub phases within the uniform phase. ठीक है. So that is the propositions of the model, and then here also we will talk about the critical appraisal. ठीक है. So there is essentially a critical appraisal of this as well. I hope it is clear. Okay. तो सबसे पहले assumptions देखते हैं. Landforms are function of competition between crustal movements and denudational processes. ठीक है. Denudational processes. यहाँ पर denudation के बजाय you can also use the word exogenetic processes. Landscape development is what? It is time independent. Can you understand this point, that he developed his model as a critique of Davis? ठीक है. Critique of Davis. कई बार लाइफ का ये लेसन है, द वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट लेसन ऑफ लाइफ, दैट इफ यू डू समथिंग, do it for its own sake, not as a reaction to something. ठीक है. There will be an element of cause effect. ठीक है. हर चीज में whatever we do, there will be some cause effect. So even if you feel that someone has, like for example, is doing something wrong and you want to change that, make it more like a response that rather than reaction. Okay. So in his case, landscape, he wanted to prove that landscape development is time independent. But dekhenge that when he's talking about, like for example, here when I'm saying waxing phase, we will see will pass through uniform phase, then it will pass through waning phase. Does it looks like it is also time dependent? Yes or no? Tell me. इसके मॉडल में भी तो वही चीज दिखाई पड़ रही है ना. लाइक हियर कैन यू सी, ये एक्चुअली गलत थोड़ा सा दिया हुआ. तो वी विल सी. कैन यू सी द हियर व्हाट इज टेकिंग प्लेस? तो इट इज स्टिल हियर is like this. This is your waxing phase of development. This is the uniform phase of development, and there is what? There is the waning phase of development. ठीक है. यहाँ पर भी is the sequence. Does it looks like there is a sequential development? Obviously yes. ठीक है. So again we will see the shape of the hill slope depends upon the relative rates of valley incision done by the river and removal of debris from the hill slopes. That means shape of the hill slope, can I say, does it depends upon the operating processes? Yes or no? What was the factor on which the shape of hill slope dependent in case of Davis? In case of Davis, have we seen that it was time dependent? Here it is very clearly process dependent. So that is the third assumption which he is talking about. Fourth assumption, there are three crustal stages. Yani ki crustal stages, it is related with what? It is related with upliftment. Okay, upliftment. So first stage is the stage of, ये actually stage लिखा हुआ है, ठीक है, क्योंकि ये बुक में भी स्टेज लिखा हुआ है, ठीक है, इसको स्टेज ही फिर रहने देते हैं, बिकॉज ये बुक में भी ऐसे ही लिखा हुआ। तो स्टेज ऑफ क्रस्टल स्टेबिलिटी when there is no active displacement, no upliftment is taking place. Second is stage of initial domed uplift in a limited area followed by widespread uplift taking place. And third, if you talk about, is the state of extensive crustal upliftment. ठीक है, so crustal upliftment which is taking place in his case is what? Crustal upliftment. Can I say here it is more progressive? So initially crustal upliftment कैसा हो रहा है? Domed uplift in limited area. Then later how it is taking place? Extensive crustal upliftment is taking place. So extensive in wider area. That is how the crustal upliftment is taking place. Can we clearly say, see here, that the manner of crustal upliftment as assumed by Penck, does it differs from the manner of crustal upliftment as it is assumed by W.M. Davis? Yes or no? Obviously yes. Okay, so this is the case. Then fifth, upliftment and erosion, they always coexist, they are working together, always working together. Okay, so this is the Penk's diagram of what the phenomena is taking place. अब देखो एक चीज यहां पर हम क्लियरली थोड़ा देख लेते हैं. दिस इज द पेंक्स डायग्राम और इसको हमें इसी तरीके से बनाना है. कैन यू सी इन केस ऑफ डेविस, once the cycle of erosion has started, both the curves are going down. Yes or no? यानी कि डेविस में साइकिल जब शुरू हो रही है, अपलिफ्टमेंट उससे पहले ही क्या हो गया, रुक गया. बट इन केस ऑफ पेंक, कैन यू सी अपलिफ्टमेंट कंटिन्यूस लाइक दिस. ठीक है, तो let us make his diagram. Penk's diagram. So when I'm drawing in the examination, it will be something like this. I should be drawing his diagram. So if you talk about, here is time, and suppose here is your base level. ठीक है, तो व्हेन आई एम ड्राइंग दिस, सबसे पहली चीज मुझे एक चीज ये बनानी है. I will also first, before drawing the curves, what I'll do, I'll make the phases. which he has talked about. So सबसे पहले let us also make the phases. 3 phases, as we know, is taking place. Even in these 3 phases, there is the A, B and C phase. This is A, B and C subphase. This is, we know it is what? This is your uniform phase. This is your waxing phase. This is essentially your waning phase of development. Okay. Now, here there are number of curves which we have to draw. One curve which I will draw will go something like this. Okay. So this is upliftment if there was no erosion. Okay. So if suppose there was no erosion, there was no exogenetic forces, landform would have got uplifted and it would have remained at the same level. Tell me, can you understand this point? Isko, if you want, you can make it dotted actually, because in the books it is given as a dotted line. So upliftment if there was no erosion, this much upliftment would have taken place, and ultimately if you talk about, it wouldn't have been reduced because there is no erosion taking place at all. But what is the reality? The reality is something like this. Okay. So it is something like this. So from here it is like it becomes something like this. I hope it is clear. So there is waxing phase, there is uniform phase, there is waning phase. अब क्या क्या ध्यान में रखना है? Can you see when I'm making this waxing phase, I have made a landform where the slopes are convex. Can you see that? They are steep and convex. When I'm entering in the uniform phase, this is upper curve क्या represent करता है? It represents the, यहाँ पर we know that it is the phase of relief. So here the upper curve represents what? It represents the relief of Amit's lower curve represents what? It represents the relief of valley floor. Okay. Now, can you see one thing that here absolute relief keeps on increasing till phase B, subphase B. Subphase B may it is more like same, but after B it begins to decline. If I calculate the distance between the upper curve and the lower curve, it keeps on increasing in the waxing phase, but it becomes same in the entire uniform phase. इसको यूनिफॉर्म इसीलिए बोल रहे हैं क्योंकि रिलेटिव रिलीफ यहाँ पे क्या हो जा रहा है, पूरे फेज में यूनिफॉर्म है. It begins to decrease in the waning phase. ठीक है. So when you enter uniform phase, there is steep straight slopes are formed. When you enter waning phase, remember this is your Bosch which was present. Bosch is now being replaced by Heldenhang, and later several Heldenhangs are being replaced also, and ultimately that concave, multi-concave surface is formed. I hope it is clear. कैसे डायग्राम बनाना है? This is the kind of accurate diagram if you talk about of Penck. Books are not doing justice. Okay, like this here is one of the diagrams taken from the book. It is not doing exact justice, although ठीक है. But हमेशा हमें याद रखना है कि जो फेज बी है वहां पर what is taking place, highest absolute relief is reached, and यहाँ पर almost ये कैसा हो जाता है, is like this. फिर उसके बाद there is a decline. I hope it is clear. तो देखो मैं इसको इस तरह से भी ड्रॉ कर सकता हूं मैं चाहूं तो, rather than making it like circular graph, I can make it more like angular, like इस तरह से. फिर यहाँ से ये इस तरह से डिक्लाइन हो रहा है. अब इससे मुझे फ़ायदा क्या होगा कि ये जो डिस्टेंस मेंटेन करना है वो डिस्टेंस मेंटेन मुझे इसमें यहाँ पर एंड in this as well it has to be same. So again, if you want, rather than keeping it fully angular or keeping it like circular type of graph, you can make it like more like this kind of angular. Okay. Okay. So let us now move on to the various phases. In case of him, the initial surface, he calls it as primer roof. Okay. So Penck used the term primer roof to represent characteristics landscape before uplift. In fact, primer roof is the initial surface representing either a newly emerged surface from below sea level or a peneplain type of land surface converted into a featureless landmass with evidence of erosion and low relief. So that initial surface is referred to as what? It is referred to as the primer roof. So landscape development begins with the upliftment of the primer roof. According to Penck, upliftment occurs with varying rates. In the beginning, the uplift is characterized by exceedingly slow upheaval of long duration, and thereafter the rate of uplift is accelerated and ultimately it stops after passing through an intermediate phase of uniform and de-accelerating rates of upliftment. So it is gradually, initially it is slow, then it becomes fast, widespread, and then again it becomes slow and ultimately stops. So the initial uplift begins with regional updoming followed by widespread uplift which is taking place. As a result of this uplift, the resultant landmass passes through three, यहाँ पर फिर से गलती हो गई है मेरे से है, it is not stage, three phases. In fact, he has specifically used the word phase to represent that these are not time dependent, these periods of development are not time dependent, they are what? Process dependent. So he has used three: waxing, uniform and waning phases. अब उसका एक जो एक्चुअल वर्ड उसने यूज किया था वो जर्मन वर्ड यहाँ पर लिखा हुआ है. आई इट इज़ वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू प्रोनाउंस, सो यू कैन, इफ यू कैन, you do it. So these are the three phases. So सबसे पहले first let us talk about the waxing phase. So first let us talk about the waxing phase of development. So when we are talking about the waxing phase of development, number of things are happening. One, we know that in waxing phase there is basically what there is: upliftment, taking place. Tell me, what is the nature of upliftment? Can I say? Initially it is slow and regional. Then what happens? With time it becomes fast and widespread. Okay, so this is upliftment taking place. Now tell me, if there is upliftment taking place in this fashion, what will happen to the energy levels? Energy levels will also increase in the same fashion. Okay, and thus, so that is one thing, first thing which is taking place. Now, साथ ही साथ upliftment के साथ क्या हो रहा है? What else is taking place along with upliftment? Remember one of his assumptions क्या कहता है? Upliftment and erosion go hand in hand. So what he is saying is that erosion also starts with upliftment. Upliftment. And what will happen with the rate of erosion? Can you understand that Penck is assuming that landforms are open systems? That is basically his mind work, although system word he is not using. But in a way, he's assuming them like open systems. So if the rate of upliftment is changing and energy levels are changing, what will happen with the rate of erosion also? Can I say rate of erosion will also progressively increase to keep pace with the rate of upliftment? So rate of erosion also progressively increases to keep pace with rate of upliftment, या इसमें इस तरह से लिखते हैं इसको, टू कैच अप to catch up with rate of upliftment, because it wants to reach equilibrium. It wants to become equal to the rate of upliftment. Tell me, is this point clear? Because this is very important point. So in waxing phase, first point we are talking about is upliftment. Second point we are talking about is erosion. Third point we are talking about is relationship between upliftment and erosion, which will ultimately determine what? Can I say it will determine the absolute relief of the landforms. So the relationship between upliftment and erosion is something like this. At this point of time, the rate of upliftment in the waxing phase, it is, can you see I'm making two such symbols? That means it is much faster than the rate of erosion. It is much faster than the rate of erosion. Okay. So if this is the relationship which exists, tell me what will be its consequence on the absolute relief. How it will be impacting the absolute relief? Tell me first. Very good, Hinshu. So here we can say that the absolute relief increases rapidly. Okay. So this is the third point. Then moving on to the fourth point, which I have to remember from the exam perspective. This is about, third point was about absolute relief. Fourth point is about relative relief. Who will tell me on what factor the relative relief depends upon? On what factor the relative relief depends upon? Can we say, does it depends upon the relationship between lowering of summit versus lowering of the valley floor? Yes or no? So at this point of time, we will be finding that the lowering of summits is slower than the lowering of valley floor. So this kind of relationship at this point of time exists. And if this is the relationship, tell me what will be the characteristic of relative relief at this point of time? Can I say relative relief also increases? Yes or no? So this is something which is, if you talk about found here. Then fifth, it is about the hill slope. Okay. So what is the characteristic of the hill slope at this point of time? Hill slopes have steep convex slope profile. Steep convex slope profile. Can you see here in the diagram? I have tried to make this as steep convex slope profile. Can you see that? So there is steep convex slope profile. अब इसको देखते हैं कि कैसे होगा. ठीक है. Think about this was the surface, and this surface is experiencing what? This surface is experiencing upliftment. So first upliftment is like this. ठीक है. So can I say it is initially slow? If it is initially slow, tell me. इसको मैं थोड़ा सा समझाता हूँ तुम्हें. इस पॉइंट को इस तरह से समझो कि अगर सपोज करो कि अपलिफ्टमेंट स्लो हो रहा है, if the upliftment is taking place in a slow fashion, does it means that the river will it have more time to do meandering, to shift its course laterally? Tell me, will in this case the river will it have more time to shift its course laterally? Tell me fast. क्या रिवर के पास ज़्यादा टाइम होगा कि वो अपने कोर्स को शिफ्ट कर सके? और अगर रिवर के पास, इफ रिवर हैज मोर टाइम टू शिफ्ट इट्स कोर्स, कैन आई से इन दिस फेज horizontal cutting will be also more? Yes or no? So again I'll draw this actually diagram. So think about this now, that this was the initial surface and first phase mein there is slow upliftment taking place. This much upliftment is taking place. So can I say in this case river will form more like this kind of valley? Yes or no? Because river is also leading to lots of shifting. So there is a wider valley, although it is V-shaped, but wider valley is being formed. But after some time, we know that what will happen with upliftment? As we know that upliftment becomes faster. Okay. So tell me, if the upliftment becomes faster, does it means that river has got now more energy? And agar river ke paas, if the river has more energy, remember, if it has more energy, can it carry more bigger particles? And bigger particles will be dragged on the floor. Then what will happen? Will there be more vertical cutting? Yes or no? Okay. So there will be more now vertical cutting taking place. There is less horizontal cutting. Then there is further increase in the rate of upliftment. Now it becomes even faster. So if the rate of upliftment has increased further faster, now does it means that the river vertical cutting done by the river, will it increase even faster? Okay, so these are phases of upliftment. And can you see, if this is the case, what is the ultimate profile that we are getting? Are we getting this kind of convex steep profile? Tell me yes or no. If there the rate of upliftment and thus the vertical cutting increases with time, it results in development of what? Steep convex profile. I hope it is clear to you. So there is steep convex slope profile, and why it takes place. Such steep convex slope profile develops. It is outcome of progressive increase in rate of upliftment. Progressive increase in the rate of upliftment and rate of vertical cutting. Okay. So because of that, what happens? Steep convex slope profiles are formed. This point is clear or not? Okay. अब एक और पॉइंट लिखने जा रहा हूं. You try to don't try to understand it at this point, just mug up. When the theory is finished, at the end I will explain it. ठीक है. फिर से बोल रहा हूं, you have to mug up at this point of time. It is very complex thing. I will explain you later. So if you talk about, also he says that these convex surfaces will have like this kind of so it's something like this. ठीक है. So towards the foothill there will be benches formed, and these are referred to as the Piedmont Trippin. Okay, so it will be convex steep profile with Piedmont Trippin. Piedmont Trippin क्या है? Benches or step-like surfaces towards the foothill. So what is Piedmont Trippin? It refers to presence of benches or step-like features near the foothills. Near the foothills. And Penck believes, Penck क्या बोलता है, that formed because the upliftment also increases in pace That means how it was increasing. Remember, initially it was what? It was local से कैसा बन गया? Regional, बड़े एरिया में होने लगा. Then it became what? Extensive. So I don't. This is very illogical thing which is saying. हम बाद में उसको देखते हैं, मैं उसको समझाऊंगा. At this point, just remember this. What is being formed? In the fifth point, it is part and parcel of the hill slope itself. First, the hill slopes are steep, convex slope profile they are having. Second thing, so this is fifth का first point है ये, ठीक है. And second thing, what is present? There is also presence of Piedmont Trepan. Am I clear on these two? Tell me. I have very clearly asked you. At this point, I am not explaining this Piedmont Trepan. I will explain it later. Okay. So this is, all these things are happening in the first phase. First phase, that is the waxing phase. Second पर आते हैं. That is uniform phase. Now, when we are talking about the uniform phase, first of all, here what is happening? First point is upliftment. Here it continues. ठीक है, it continues. Although what happens? It later slows down. ठीक है, it later slows down and stops by the end of this phase. ठीक है, so by the end of this phase it also stops. यहाँ पे when we are saying continues, continues का मतलब क्या है? It continues to initially increase and then stabilizes. ठीक है, तो it increases when in phase A में increase हो रहा है. It stabilizes when in phase B it stabilizes. It slows down in what? C. It slows down and it stops by the end. I hope I am very clear on upliftment. So that was first thing. Then if you talk about erosion, so erosion increases. कब ये increase होगा? Phase A में increase होगा. Then erosion becomes stable. ठीक है, from phase B onwards. ठीक है, तो वो स्टेबल हो जाएगा और वो उतना ही रहेगा. Then on the basis of this, now we can talk about number of things. Here first I am talking about relative relief. Relative relief. So tell me, what is happening with the relative relief? Relative relief किस पे डिपेंड करता है? It depends upon the difference in lowering of summits and valley floors. It depends upon these two, difference in the lowering of summits and valley floors. So here we find that in the entire uniform phase, what is taking place? Lowering of summits becomes equal to lowering of valley floors. Lowering of the valley floor. इसका मतलब क्या होगा? It means that the relative relief remains constant throughout this phase. Throughout this phase. I hope you get my point. Till this much it is clear. Then moving on. Now it is about the fourth point, that is absolute relief. So in this case, absolute relief depends upon what? It depends upon difference between rate of upliftment and erosion. Okay. So depending upon absolute relief, this phase is sub-classified into three sub-phases. So there is sub-phase A. So in sub-phase A, what we find? The rate of upliftment is greater than the rate of erosion. Rate of erosion. Remember in the वैक्सिंग फेज मैंने यहाँ पे दो सिंबल्स बनाए थे, यानी कि वो बहुत फास्ट था. यहाँ पर डिफरेंस हैज बीन रिड्यूस्ड. So here what is happening? As a result of this, absolute relief continues to increase, although with slower pace than waxing. Okay, so this is sub phase A. Then we come to the sub phase B. तो सब फेज बी में क्या हो रहा है? द रेट ऑफ upliftment is becoming equal to the rate of erosion. So what will be the outcome of this? Absolute relief remains constant here. Then if you talk about, comes the subphase C. So in subphase C, what is happening? Rate of upliftment is becoming less than the rate of erosion. So at this point of time now, absolute relief decreases. Tell me, is it clear now? So this is what is happening in the uniform phase. अब यूनिफॉर्म फेज में एक फिफ्थ पॉइंट हमेशा हम जो बात कर रहे हैं, लेट अस टेक दैट आल्सो. So what is that fifth point? It is what is happening with the hill slope. So hill slope profile is steep straight slopes are formed. ठीक है. So steep straight slopes are formed because there is what? These are formed due to rate of erosion of summits equaling the rate of erosion of valley floors and progressively क्या हो रहा है? And progressively rate of upliftment and rate of erosion becoming equal. Rate of erosion and rate of upliftment becoming equal. You just have to remember one thing. एक चीज हमने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बात की थी कि ये जो यूनिफॉर्म फेज है ऑफ पेंक, टेल मी, in this uniform phase, is he talking something like this? When he's saying that the rate of erosion of summits is becoming equal to the rate of erosion of valley floor. Does he mean something like this, which was later talked about by the non-cyclic school of JT Hack? Think and tell me. I'm waiting for your answers. Obviously, yes. ठीक है, तो हम बाद में इसको कोरिलेट करेंगे, बट एट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम जस्ट रिमेंबर that it is basically what there is a straight, as we have drawn here in the diagram. You can see कि मैंने steep straight surface बनाया है slope का. ठीक है, so this is what, this is uniform phase. Moving on to our third, and this is what, this is your waxing phase, sorry, waxing लिख रहा हूँ, waning phase of development. waning phase of development. So if you talk about the waning phase of development, number one, what is happening with the upliftment? So upliftment, as we know it, completely stops in this phase. If you talk about erosion, it continues on both summits and valley floor, दोनों जगह पे erosion continue रहेगा. So if you talk about third, if we talk about what will be the case of absolute relief. So tell me, what will be the relationship between absolute relief here? Can I say the rate of upliftment will be now much smaller than the rate of erosion? So if this is the case, what will happen with the absolute relief? It will decline rapidly. So absolute relief decreases rapidly. Okay. If you talk about the case of relative relief, so relative relief also, what is taking place? We find that in this case now, the rate of erosion of summits is faster than the rate of erosion of valley. So what will be happening because of this? Relative relief also decreases. So relative relief also decreases. Then finally, if you talk about what will happen with the hill slopes. So what will be happening with the hill slopes? कौन बताएगा? What will happen with the hill slopes? Can I say here slope replacement phenomena occurs where what was taking place? Back wasting and slope replacement of Bosch and Heldenhang occur. This leads to formation of concave gentle slopes. So gentle concave slopes are formed. Okay. So when two such concave slopes merge, what is taking place? There is formation of conical hills. What was the name of the conical hills? Hinsel bergs are formed. ठीक है, and ultimate outcome क्या निकल के आ रहा है इन सब का? There is formation of low relief multi-concave surface, which is referred to as end. ठीक है, so finally the landform is converted from a primer roof to an end roof. ठीक है, and we have already seen how does the end roof will look like. It will be something like this kind of end room surface. It will not be so much gentle like the penny plane. Its characteristic is little different. Both are low relief surfaces, but penny plane was more gently sloping. यहाँ पर you will be finding that there will be more prominent angular such kind of slopes will be present. So this is the final outcome in the case of PENGS. I hope I am clear. Tell me. Okay. So this is the PENGS model. So what we are going to do is now we will stop for today. There is some change in the class timing for tomorrow. I have to go tomorrow to Rajendra Nagar, and guidance is actually going to shift its office. So uske related कुछ काम है मेरा वहाँ पर. So tomorrow my class will be at 4 PM पे. I will be taking the class. ठीक है यार, ठीक है. Okay, so tomorrow I will be taking the class at 4 PM. Class timing, and there is a video on रीजनल प्लानिंग, जो कि कल एक क्लास होनी थी हमारी संडे को, बट आई वॉज नॉट वेल, सो आई डिडंट गेट अप इवन. So there will be a video on regional planning which will be uploaded in the evening today. ठीक है. So we'll be stopping for today. I hope it is clear. Password protected, यार मुझे नहीं पता है. You are Sagar, you have joined from where? Guidance or Sarthi? I will ask. अगर ऐसा है तो पासवर्ड प्रोटेक्टेड तो कोई भी PDF नहीं होती है which we are uploading. Maybe something conversion में कुछ problem हुआ होगा. Because of that, I'll ask, and if it is so, they'll change the PDF. ठीक है. So we'll stop for today. Goodbye. Take care. कल मिलते हैं 4 PM.